What's up, folks? Good morning. Jerit Roser of Louisiana versus all y'all. Chance Hester of Louisiana Football Report. And we wanted to just kind of check back in. We talked about a lot of our reactions last week to the initial bracket and some matchups we're looking forward to, teams to watch and whatnot. And now we've got a round of action under our belt the last couple of days. 160 teams, 158 teams have played so far. We've got Frederick A. Douglass and Livingston Collegiate on Saturday to wrap up the first round action. And so the field is already starting to thin itself quite a bit as we'll have 80 teams wrapping up their season this week and some surprises along the way. Chance, I mean, we're going to go just like we did in the reactions to the bracket show and go small divisions on up to big, but any big picture, immediate reactions, anything you want to share before we start diving into it all?
A lot of it kind of just went true to form last night, and on the few games we had on Thursday, not a ton of upsets really across the state. I mean, you have a few 19-14s and 15-18s and stuff that could kind of go either way, but not a ton of shocks. Everything's kind of holding true to what we expected the brackets to look like after the first day. But some really good games. Some games that came down to the last play, especially down in our Baton Rouge area. A couple of lopsided ones, which you always see in the first round. But so far, the brackets are kind of holding to what we expected them to look like at this point.
Yeah, and we won't talk. We both filled out all of our brackets. We won't say exactly what any records look like or anything like that. Somebody may be a game or two ahead, and nobody wants to hear about that. Give whoever it is a chance to catch up a game or two.
Yeah, we're just here to have fun. Doesn't matter if you win or lose. It's we're just here to have fun. It's just all. That's why we play the game.
So jumping in with Division 4 non-select, and we talked about this was one that historically you don't get a whole lot of early upsets. You end up with a lot of top 8 seeds advancing to the quarters and things like that in recent years. There were, a couple of opening round upsets in this bracket, though. When you look at trying to pull up the right bracket there, East Feliciana going up to Homer and coming away with a 6-0 win, and then one that I'd kind of earmarked, Franklin going to White Castle, a short trip and getting a win, the 19-14 seed. But in terms of all of the outcomes, Montgomery, the 16-17 Vinton, Welsh beats West St. Mary, Faraday beats Lake Arthur. That was an 8-25. North Iberville, I'm sure, is one you're going to talk about here in a second. The 5 seed beating Oberlin, number 28. General Trask, 64-20 over Centerville. Grand Lake, the 13 seed, wins a close one over 20 seed Jonesboro Hodge. Elton getting the best of Basile again, 22-18, a rematch of a regular season game. Logansport with a huge win, 61-0 over Varnado. Mangum beats East Iberville 63-28. And I don't have the West St. John Arcadia score in front of me, but I know West St. John won by a few scores to advance to face Mangum. So yeah, your immediate reactions to that, 2 upsets and a couple of other notable outcomes for sure.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, the 2 upsets obviously weren't created equal. East Feliciana goes all the way to Homer and squeaks out a 6-0 win. Franklin goes to White Castle and wins, I believe, 44-0. And so the 2 upsets weren't created equal. So you in the early rounds, a lot of times you can throw those seeds out the window because it's all math, so it doesn't necessarily tell you who the better team is when it actually comes down to it. I think honestly the biggest question mark in this bracket going forward is what happens with Faraday. Are they going to be able, after last night's game got called early, are they going to be able to play next week? Is it going to be a thing where they only have some guys suspended? Is the whole team going to be thrown out? I saw some footage of what happened, and it's a really unfortunate situation for really both teams, regardless of what the score was. But I think the biggest story coming out of this bracket, at least for right now, is going to be, does Welsh have a game next week, or do they get to start prepping for Haynesville a week early?
I don't know how much you can or want to share about that. You texted me to, that something had happened at Faraday last night, and I was trying to on Twitter check and see what I could find, and just saw a couple of little chatter back and forth. But what happened there? Any level of detail?
So from what I saw, there was a a quarterback scramble by Faraday kind of late in the second quarter. The game was already getting out of hand. It was 30-7 Faraday at that point. Didn't look even like a late hit, but when the two kids got up, they started jawing. A punch was thrown, and then it kind of just escalated from there. Now, it's interesting because obviously Lake Arthur won't be affected because, they were behind anyway. But the game being called that early is interesting because I think usually the LHSAA requires you to play 3 quarters before they can give a win to somebody. So they didn't get there. So I'm not really sure how they play that. Lake Arthur's, I think coaches based on the video did a pretty good job of keeping their kids from leaving the bench. I think the only Lake Arthur kids I really saw involved were already on the field. And the incident took place on Faraday's bench. So none of their kids really left the bench either. And usually that's where those suspensions come from, is from leaving the bench. And so in this regard, do you just punish the kids involved and you try to let them play? So it's going to be interesting. The LHSA already has decisions to make this week, all right, in other brackets. And so now you're looking at a potential, and we had this last year, if you recall, Jennings and Plaquemine had a post-game dust up that ended up being really bad. And so it's unfortunate that these things happen. I know emotions are running high. Nobody wants to go home in the playoffs. And when you're kind of behind by a couple scores, I know things can get kind of frustrating, especially for those seniors that know that they may never play football again. But it's really sad to see stuff like this happen. So that's why I think the biggest story out of Division IV non-select is Faraday able to play next week.
For sure, we'll be watching that. That's a talented team that I had predicted to get on to the quarters and be kind of an interesting matchup with Haynesville. But now we'll wait and see what happens with the Faraday Trojans. And I mentioned a team that you talked about in the bracket release, North Iberville, Coach Gast and company out there get a win. I think it was their first time in the playoffs in 27 years for a school that had been closed for a while or not having football. And I saw 14-0 Productions, I think, said it was their first win in school history. I don't know if he's talking about just in a reopen or if that's, I don't know the history prior going years back.
Yeah, I usually trust 14-0 Productions when it comes to history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
It wouldn't be surprising. But no, it was a great night for them. You don't really know where they're going to go from here. They are a high seed, but, they don't have any playoff experience. And so they're going to eventually run into somebody that does. And so it's going to be interesting how that kind of shakes out. General Trask has been a really competitive team the last couple of years. And so you're really kind of known for running the ball well. And so it's going to be an interesting matchup. But like you said, what it's all about right now is, as we sit on Saturday morning, is just congratulations to that coaching staff, those kids, and that community around Maringouin. I know that they're really excited to have football back. They were getting to host a playoff game last night. They had a big win. And so I know it's just a great night out there in North Iberville Parish.
And looking at the Division IV select bracket, 8 games last night, all 8 higher seeds win. The 16-seeded Westminster Christian team out of Opelousas beats Delta Charter 54-12. St. Martin's Episcopal, Harlem Berry and those guys 56-36 over Delhi Charter. Kentwood beats St. Mary's 56-6. Southern Lab 52-0 shutout. 13 over 20 seed Sacred Heart. Central Catholic, the 14 seed, shuts out Lincoln Prep, the 19 seed, 14-0. Washita Christian, 11 seed, 49-13 over Glenbrook. Hamilton Christian was trailing, I believe, at one point, 23rd seeded St. John, but comes back and wins that one, 41-30 to advance. And Opelousas Catholic edges Westminster Christian of Lafayette, the newer Westminster Christian, 34-33 in a 15-8 matchup to advance to see Ascension Catholic. As I mentioned, all the higher seeds win. Any kind of big takeaways from any of that?
Really, it's kind of just what we expected to see. Not to talk split or no split here at all, because that's just no fun to talk about these days. But most of the disparity that you see between select and non-select is usually in the smaller brackets.
Yeah.
I've always been of the mind that there's really not much difference in 5A between the top dogs in either bracket as far as resources and talent and stuff like that. But when you get down to like 1A, like I understand that there's some difference in programs there. And so in this one, no surprises, all the top seeds advance. It creates some really fun second round matchups. Like you said, St. John was actually up at the half. And just kind of didn't have some things go their way in the second half. My wife was listening to the game. She's a teacher over there, and there was some turnovers in the second half that kind of slipped up St. John. But Opelousas Catholic, Ascension Catholic in the second round is going to be a ton of fun. Obviously, OCS and Point Capee is kind of the big one that I'm looking at. I think it's going to be one of the better games in the state. CCA and Central Catholic is a rematch from 2 weeks ago. The district finale. Covenant gets to play them back to back. Central Catholic had obviously a game in the middle. CCA won that game 25-7 to finish off their 10-0 record. So Central Catholic gets another shot at them next week. But no, this bracket's not really a surprise at this point. And it would it doesn't look like it's going to be a surprise going forward. You expect kind of the usual suspects to be there when it's over.
And just like we talked about in the bracket release show, some of those usual suspects could be interesting when you look at Ouachita Christian, Kentwood, and Southern Lab as 11, 12, and 13 seeds. And so how some of that shakes out, they'll have to head on the road this week. In some cases, longer trips like Southern Lab heading up to Monroe against St. Fred. But obviously there's a lot of playoff history there between those two, as well as Southern Lab and OCS. Some intriguing opening round matchups in that bracket, but I think this second round is going to be where things start to get real fun in Division 4 select. Division 3 non-select, running down the bracket, there were, I believe, 2 upsets, including the close seeding upset technically of Donaldsonville over Baker, a matchup that we talked about, the 17 over 16 seed. The other upset was Port Allen, the 23 seed, going out to Church Point and getting a 16-7 win. The rest of those outcomes: 9th seeded Pine beats St. Helena 40-16. Kaplan, the 8th seed, with a 50-0 shutout of North Webster. Union Parish, 5 seed, wins 42-6 against Oakdale. 12th seeded Red River, 48-6 over 21st seeded Winfield. 13th seeded Westlake shuts out 20th seeded Crowley 55-0. 14th seeded Mansfield beats 19th seeded Avoyles 58-14. 11th seeded Lakeside 37-12 over 22 Bogalusa. Sterlington 63-12 over 27 seeded Patterson. Gina with a big shutout 52-0 over 26 seeded Caldwell Parish. And Lauraville with that 15 over 18 seed win over Marksville by a 48-26 final score. So 2 upsets. I think for the most part, the teams that we expect to make some deep runs, we see start on the right foot. Your reactions in D3 non-select?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that sticks out to me was like what a night for Don Gibson and the Port Allen Pelicans. I've coached against Church Point on the road before in the playoffs. Like that's a tough place to go get a win. And so Port Allen going on the road, as a with a 13 seed gap between them and Church Point and going and getting a win. That's a big night for Port Allen, man. Like, it's easy to root for the Pelicans across the river. Coach Gibson does a great job. He's a great man. He's always been good to me when I've ever had to deal with him as a coach. And so I'm really excited for them and their kids just on a standpoint of that. Getting to host a playoff game next week against Gina is going to be a lot of fun. The Pine Kaplan matchup in round 2 is probably the one that looks the most fun on paper. Both teams kind of had big moments this season, throughout their regular season schedule. Now for Pine, a lot of their big moments were like really tight losses to really good teams. They lose to 1 seed Franklinton in overtime by a point. They lose a tight game to Jewel Sumner that we know is a really good team this year. And Kaplan, of course, had that marquee win over Southern Lab earlier this year. And so that's probably the most fun matchup. We don't get a lot of North Louisiana second round matchups, but Union Parish and Red River going at it in the second round. That should be a lot of fun. Lakeside and Sterlington is another North Louisiana matchup. D3 non-select is kind of where North Louisiana gets its flowers, it seems like, every year, with Sterlington and Oak Grove and Union Parish and them kind of always being in the conversation. And so I think Pine and Kaplan's probably the one I'm most excited about. And again, just like shout out to Port Allen. That's a big moment for that program.
Yeah, just I mean, echoing that for sure. Port Allen is, a team that we've both been close to, just being right here across the river, like you mentioned. Credit to those guys. I'd seen the Church Point team with Coach Poole and company this year. Like those guys, tough to see their season end. But the Pelicans move on. Good for Coach Gibson and company. And another matchup to shout out in that second round that is really intriguing to me is that 2-15 Erath and Lauraville, a rematch of a one-score game earlier this season. But heading on over to D3 Select, I was trying to pull up the stats on that. This is another one that was all 8 higher seeds advancing. 16th seeded Parkview Baptist getting past Lafayette Renaissance Charter. Lafayette Christian with a 72-0 opening round game over Beekman Charter to head on to that second round against Notre Dame. A meet 56-0 over Sarah T. Reed. Slaughter Community Charter 50-20 over Thomas Jefferson. De La Salle 48-0 over Fisher. Pope John Paul II 39-14 over Holy Savior Menard. North Lake Christian 48-16 over St. Louis Catholic, and Darbone Woods Charter 42-24 over Country Day in the 15-18 matchup. And so not only the higher seeds winning, but some of those higher seeds really kind of flexing their muscles a little bit.
Yeah, just when you think LCA is not who they used to be, they go out and win a playoff game 72-0. Darbone Woods, shout out to them. That's their first playoff win, I think, in school history. If I believe I saw that last night. They haven't been a school terribly long, but first playoff win in school history. And their reward is number 2 seed Isidore Newman going from Farmerville all the way to New Orleans. LCA obviously made a statement last night that they are they're not a pushover just because they lost some really good talent and moved down in classification. That creates a really fun matchup with Notre Dame from district from a few weeks ago, and they'll play the winner. The winner of that game will play the winner of another rematch where Dunham and Parkview played week 1, and Dunham won 46-0. And so 2 matchups that are rematches that'll lead to a quarterfinal berth. Shout out to Lafayette Renaissance first year, really playing varsity. Go to the playoffs, right on the border of a home game for them in a tough district with LCA and Notre Dame. I promise you, Parkview's glad that they drew them this year because I think that they're only going to continue to get better as the years go on. A meet and moving on, not a surprise. Like I mentioned on our bracket show, them and Bunkie is going to be a really fun second round game. I think that we're going to find out how good Bunkie is. Shout out to Slaughter Charter, another program that hasn't been around a terribly long time, doesn't have a lot of playoff wins under its belt. And so really good to see them go get one. And then just kind of what we expected with De La Salle, Pope John Paul, and North Lake handling their business.
Yep, some really good second round matchups. You mentioned them. I'm all pretty much there. I know that De La Salle team is a 14 seed heading up to Calvary Baptist is one that Coach Gewen and company were. It wouldn't have been upset if De La Salle was matched up elsewhere in that bracket, but that should be a great second round matchup.
Yeah.
Looking at D2 non-select, and that is a bracket where actually that I started to say all of the higher seeds won. That's just I nailed all 12 of the picks.
Same.
I didn't mean to do that way, but there were a couple upsets.
2 upsets. Yeah.
Yeah, 21 Wassman over Minden. Trying to pull up that score was 26-11. The 21st seeded Wassman Wildcats going out to Minden and getting a win, and then Cecilia the 18 over 15. That score is not on the LHSAA bracket, but I think it was 50-29 or something along those lines. And then going down the rest of the bracket, West Feliciana, the 16 seed, advances over Carroll. Iota 21-0 over Assumption. Iowa 48-6 over Lagrange. Bruley with a 49-29 win over South Beauregard. Opelousas, a game that was Thursday night, 14th seeded Opelousas with a 47-6 win over Bastrop. Northwest and DeRitter, I felt like was kind of tight for a stretch there in the first half, and then Northwest kind of turned it on and stretched out that 35-7 win. Plaquemine, the 6th seed with a 43-0 shutout of Grant. North DeSoto 44-0 over Woodlawn Shreveport, a team that they played for the second time in 4 or 5 weeks there and got another big win. Belle Chase 56-21 over North Vermilion wraps up the first round action. Initial takeaways.
Shout out again, like we're kind of shouting out some of these coaches, but Coach Cahey with Wassman getting that upset win in the first round. Wassman's plays in a really tough district, similar to Minden, the team that they beat. So both of these teams play in tough districts. So Wassman getting a big win on the road. Didn't have to travel too far, and for them, they'll get to host Iowa next week. And then Opelousas getting the win as the 14 over the 19 Bastrop, something that we all kind of expected to happen. Maybe the most dangerous 14 seed in the history of LHSAA football. And Cecilia getting the quote-unquote upset win, which is, I think both of us picked that too, and kind of expected Cecilia and Lutcher to be one of the games to watch next week. I think Northwest and Plaquemine is going to be a ton of fun. Plaquemine had an excellent season. Plaquemine had one slip up, and that was week 1 to Zachary. And so other than that, they rolled through District 6 4A. And so, 2 teams loaded with talent. And so Plaquemine and Northwest in the second round is going to be a lot of fun. Cecilia and Lutcher, I think, gives us our first opportunity for like a really quote unquote big upset in any of the playoff brackets. If, an 18 going against a 2, where I feel like the teams are not really that far apart. As far as talent goes. So if Cecilia's healthy, if Diesel's feeling good, if he gets going, then anything can happen in that matchup.
Pretty sure that's where I'm at next Friday. I haven't set that, but as soon as I saw that was the matchup that we got, that kind of topped my list. I was at Destrehan last night, where their OC Clint Harrison was the OC at Cecilia previously, and so we were kind of talking about it as I was leaving. And just to your point, he said if 4 Diesel is healthy, then they can play with anybody in the state, and that should be a fun one. I love the second round matchups in this bracket, particularly the bottom half of the bracket, and so really looking forward to that one. Going on to Division 2 Select, and the upset there is 22 Hannon over 11th seeded St. Michael, 29-20. The rest of the outcomes, Laranger gets a big 60-70 win in 16-17 matchup with Kenner Discovery. Lake Charles College Prep on Thursday night shut out McKinley 42-0. St. Charles Catholic 33-8 over Northside to advance on to Madison Prep. Estruma in a battle 13-20 edges Booker T. Washington of Shreveport, Coach Coop and company up there, 46-44 to advance. We've got I know there's another, 2 more final scores. Loyola Prep 63-44 over Sophie B. Wright, and Booker T. Washington New Orleans went up to Buckeye and got a win. And this is the bracket we have one that we're still waiting on. Frederick A. Douglass and Livingston Collegiate, the 14-19 matchup is today. Initial thoughts for D2 Select.
A bit of a surprise. I had Hannon falling to St. Michael when I filled out my bracket. St. Michael got their first playoff win in school history recently, and so I thought they were in a good position to get another one and move on to face Vanderbilt Catholic. But shout out to Hannon, being a 1-9 team, having a lot of really close losses in their district, especially, and then they come up here to Olympia Stadium and get the win. They kind of controlled the game from the jump. I think they were like 22-7 at half or something like that, and then they were able to hold on there at the end as the Warriors kind of tried to make a comeback. Estruma gets the win in really tight, exciting fashion. We talked about a little bit on the bracket show last week. Estruma's offense, how they'll score 46 and then 6, 46 and then 6, and it's kind of been that wave throughout the season. But it creates a really interesting matchup with a top 4 seed that is really unproven in the eyes of the state in Haynes Academy. A team that we don't know a ton about, really, as far as like the casual fan. Undefeated on the season, didn't play a lot of marquee matchups, and so, the argument could be made that Estruma is the best team they've played all year. And so that's going to create a really fun matchup, like I said in the bracket show, that could create a really fun Baton Rouge matchup in the quarterfinals between Madison Prep and Estruma if both teams are able to get by, tough matchups. Madison Prep hosting a 12 seed in St. Charles is a tough one. St. Charles is not used to being a 12-ish seed. And so St. Charles obviously lost a lot from that state runner-up team. Battled through some tight losses this year, playing a really tough schedule as they always do. And so now they get a chance to go up against Madison Prep, who had a really good season, district championship. And so those are the kind of things that just immediately jump out.
We mentioned Cecilia upsetting Pearl River in terms of the seeding, but that 7-4A district, other than that tough draw, had a really nice night with Hannon getting that upset win. Franklinton obviously was a top seed and had a bye. Lakeshore advancing past Rain, Larange getting the win, and so some good stuff for some of those North Shore teams. Jumping into D1 non-select, when we get into D1 is where we missed a couple. There were a couple of more surprises up in these Class 5A and a few 4A team brackets. The upsets on the non-select side were Chalmette, the 24th seed, over 9th seeded Terrebonne. West Monroe, the 21 seed, going over to 12th seeded Parkway and really controlling that game from jump. I think it was 28-0, and they go on to a 35-14 win. And Westgate from New Iberia, the 18 seed, comes out this way, goes to the pit at Sanamaw and gets a 28-20 win. The rest of those games, 16 seeded Covington survives 17 seeded Barb 36-29. I know Jeremy Elsie had an interception late to kind of seal that one. Hanville and HL Bourgeois sounds like it was back and forth a bit early. The HL was off to a nice start in that game, but Hanville wins 49-39 to advance. Mandeville, the 5 seed, 31-16 win over 28 seeded Thibodaux. I don't have the final score in front of me, but I know that West Washita and Denham Springs game was an overtime game that the Chiefs hold on and get out.
42-41.
42-41, big win for West Washita up there to hold off the visiting Yellow Jackets. Zachary, 14 over 19 Sam Houston by a 54-35 score. South, another one that I don't see the score on the bracket, but Southside, actually two that I don't see the score on the bracket, but I know Walker beat Dutchtown, the 22 over 11 seed. That was a second win this season for Walker over Dutchtown, and 4 straight against the Griffins now. Southside beats Live Oak, the 6 seed, over the 27 seed. 7 seeded Northwood Shreveport, 54-27 win over 26 seeded Salmon. The one I was at last night, Destrehan, 30-12 over 23rd seeded Washita Parish. And then, as I mentioned, the Westgate win at Sanamaw. So yeah, this one was one with a couple more surprises, I guess, here and there. What was your biggest takeaway from the first round of action in D1 non-select?
While we've been kind of shouting people out, shout out to Chalmette. That is their first road playoff win in 29 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that's a big moment for that program over a Terrebonne team that was in the top 10. Terrebonne, another team that came from obviously a super competitive district with Destrehan and Hanville. And so the Owls get a big win there. West Monroe gets the upset win that I know I picked West Monroe in my bracket to win. There's just something like from a coaching perspective, like seeing a team in person versus just looking at another team's schedule. And like I saw West Monroe in person this year when we played them, and I just knew that team was better than their record and their seed because of the district and the schedule that they played. And so I'm not surprised by that result. Parkway had a big slide recently. They were the 5 seed, lose to Evangel week 10, slide back to 12, and then get upset by 21. Denham Springs last night went for 2 in the win late in the game and didn't get it. I talked to one of their coaches this morning who's a buddy of mine. Obviously, he's having a rough morning. But, they on the road, a lot of teams, they say that's the thing. If you're on the road, go for 2. If you're at home, kick the extra point. And so they were on the road and I have no problem with him going for it. I like the decision. But shout out to West Washita, like you said. Like, you talk about a team in a tough district. West Washita, Ruston, Ash, West Monroe, Washita, like, that's an insane district. And so they finished 13, get the home playoff win. Walker apparently seems to be the kryptonite of Dutchtown right now. So Coach Mose, the DC over there, is a buddy of mine at Walker, does a great job, former Catholic High coach. Now, the big swing in that game was crazy. So that game was 7-7 and right before halftime. Dutchtown's going in to take the lead, and they fumble into the end zone. Walker picks it up, goes to midfield, scores. Dutchtown fumbles the next kickoff. Walker scores again. So you were looking at 14-7 Dutchtown at the half. It turns out to be 21-7 Walker at the half. And there was a few plays like that again in the second half where Dutchtown kind of like lost the ball, and Walker was able to always take advantage of those mistakes. And so they did an excellent job to go get another win. Jess Curtis gets his first playoff win at Southside. We all know him from what he did at Manny for so long and the success that they had. And then he goes to Natchitoches Central for just one season. And then, as it often happens with us dudes, he gets married and has to move. And so he follows love, and he goes down to Lafayette and gets a job at Southside where his style of offense fits perfectly in what they already kind of ran. And so he was kind of a perfect hire for Southside when they were looking to replace their previous coach. And so Westgate over Sandoval, another game that kind of came down right to the end. Sandoval scored with about 30 or 40 seconds left in the game. They kicked the onside kick, and they get it back. And then Westgate's able to hold on there for a 28-20 win. A team that we talked about in the bracket show with Westgate, a team we're used to seeing being a higher seed. And so they obviously play in a really tough district. They technically play up in the playoffs because they're a 4A team during the regular season. And so they get a big win, creates a fun matchup with them in Airline. I think the over-under on that one is going to be pretty interesting in total points. But that should be a fun matchup. And so, but everything else kind of holds to form. Zachary tied at 28 at the half with Sam Houston. They get some things fixed, definitely, in their halftime adjustments with Coach Brew and Coach Zito and those guys. They're able to go get a big home playoff win, and now you have a rematch of them and Ruston, which, of course, was the state championship game a year ago.
I guess piggybacking off of just a couple of things you mentioned, I thought the Chalmette over Terrebonne upset was the biggest surprise to me of all of the outcomes, and so credit again to the Owls for pulling that one off. Walker over Dutchtown was one that I had picked Dutchtown because it's tough to me when two teams feel like they're in the same ballpark of being relatively evenly matched to keep beating them, beat them twice in the same season and so on. But the one thing that obviously can swing that in a hurry is trouble taking care of the football and some turnovers, which is exactly what happened to the Griffins. And I was asked early this season, it might have been after West Monroe and Catholic when I was over there with you guys for that game. And I went on radio the next week with Fox and company up there in Monroe and Ruston. They asked kind of takeaways from West Monroe this season, who had some of those ups and downs. And so I still very much thought they looked like one of the top 15 teams or so in the state, 15 to 20 teams. And so not overly surprised there. And wrapping things up with D1 Select, 8 matchups there. Another one where I missed a few of those. The 8 matchups end up being 3 seeding upsets, technically. 17th seed Huntington comes down to Hammond, the 16th seed, and gets a really strong, no doubter, 34-6 win. John Curtis, the 19th seed, with a 21-13 win over 14th seeded Brother Martin. Second time this season, 5 straight now in that matchup for the Patriots to beat the Crusaders. And on Thursday night, we had the 18-15 Evangel Christian, 58-48, beating Captain Shreve. Another high-scoring game between those two teams, but some defensive stops late actually end up helping clinch that for the Eagles to advance on to go face Alexandria in the second round. The rest of those outcomes from last night, St. Aug, the 9 seed, gets a 44-7 win over Karen Crow, McDonough 35, 49-9 over Riverdale. East Jefferson, another rematch game, beats Bonneville again, 28-10. Jesuit with a 45-7 win over Lafayette. That was the 11 and the 22 seed in that one. CE Bird, 20-0 shutout of Woodlawn of Baton Rouge in the 10-23 game. And so our last bracket, one that some interesting outcomes in the first round for sure, and certainly some interesting games ahead. What's your thoughts looking at the one that you'll actually be a part of here as Catholic comes off y'all's bye?
Yeah, and so shout out to Coach Dennis of Huntington. Going down Shreveport all the way to Hammond. Obviously, it's a long trip, but they handled business, and they get to play the 1-seed Carr. I talked to him a little bit last night about the win. His guys were pretty fired up. I don't even know if you can congratulate Coach Curtis at this point on playoff wins. I don't know if it's just normal day for him, but an upset that I picked. I thought Curtis would get it done. It's hard to pick ever against them in the months of November and December. Jesuit Turlings, I think, creates, to me, honestly, one of the more fun and interesting matchups of the second round across the state. Turlings had such a great season. They ran into their normal kryptonite, which is St. Thomas More, that they just can't seem to get over that hump. And so they get it. They get a bye. Now they draw Jesuit, who played for the state championship just a couple of years ago, and so that's a really fun matchup. We talked a little bit on the bracket show about after Shreve and Evangel played the first time. There was a little bit of chatter back and forth about, was Evangel more focused on winning or setting records, and and there was some talk about their inability to run the football and how if they wanted to win big games, they'd have to be able to run the football. Well, Evangel ran for 200 yards as a team against Shreve on Thursday night. So I think they heard what people were saying, and they wanted to show that they could get it done on the ground, and they do. And that creates such a fun matchup, like we mentioned last week. Thomas Bachman coaching against not only his alma mater, but a place where he won a state championship as the offensive coordinator before he started his head coach journey at Bastrop. And then, obviously, the relationships on both of those staffs between Josh Alexander, the DC for Evangel, Thomas Bachman, the head coach at Ash. So that's a fun matchup there. Bird and Woodlawn. I was talking to a buddy at Woodlawn. Bird kind of just controlled that game on the ground. It was a 20-0 game. Woodlawn just kind of couldn't really get it going offensively. But I think Coach Pellegrin did a really good job at Woodlawn in his first year. And I think that they'll continue to improve under his leadership. East Jeff wins the rematch with Bonneville. Game got a little chippy late. There were a couple of ejections on both sides late in the game, but they were able to get it settled down from what I was told and finish off the last 4 minutes and finish the game the right way. So that'll obviously impact East Jeff's roster a little bit going into the game with Catholic next week. St. Aug, St. Thomas More, that's a matchup that a few years ago you would have thought we would never get in the playoffs between St. Aug and St. Thomas More. And so that's going to be really fun. Two of the most elite coaching staffs probably in the whole state, led by incredible head coaches that have had success everywhere that they've been. Obviously, St. Thomas More's had their coach forever. Coach Valdez is still new at St. Aug, but has had a ton of success everywhere he's been. And so I know this bracket still kind of runs through Carr and Ash, but those 3, 4, 5 seeds in this bracket have had a ton of success in history, and so this is going to be a fun one.
We'll see how some of these matchups in the second round shake out, but you mentioned when you start saying 3, 4, 5, and that was one of the things that even at the initial look at the bracket, seeing Catholic and Rummel both in that same quadrant as a potential quarterfinal matchup. Mm-hmm. There have been so many great games between those two programs through the years. The Huntington game, I have on my written bracket Huntington, and then as I was putting them together for the videos on Louisiana versus All Y'all, I guess late one night was I probably took the higher seed here. It's a long trip, and saw that I put Hammond. And so when I was checking through last night, on one that I thought was going to be a close call. My official prediction ends up being wrong, but credit to Coach Dennis and company up there, the Raiders, Tyler Welsh, Nehemiah Barrett, and some of those guys that I really like on that roster getting that done. Jesuit is a team that my alma mater has already exceeded my expectations for this season with as much youth and kind of new faces stepping into bigger roles this year, and has had a heck of a season thus far. And I like that matchup that you mentioned with Turlings in the second round. Coach Shapanche and company have had a great season, but that's going to be a fun one next Friday that I think the Blue Jays, even as a lower seed, have a chance at pushing this thing farther and surprising me a little bit more. Got a text this morning from Spencer Verrett from the LHSAA network. And I mean, this was a little bit of a different John Curtis season, but he said on their show last night, he said if you had told him he was going to get a Curtis and Acadiana matchup, he would have said it's at least the semis, if not the finals. We get that one in the second round. And so they'll go out there, and I would traditionally say run the heck out of the ball and get out of there early one way or the other between those two teams. But the way Acadiana is throwing the ball around a little bit more, that could be a little bit of a different matchup than in years past. And then, that Evangel and Alexandria matchup, Brett McCormick will be up there and send some post-game videos into Louisiana versus all y'all next week. A real fun one. I was pulling up Pop Houston's numbers from last night. He didn't throw for 800 this time around, but he was 25 for 37 for 391 and 4 touchdowns, ran 10 times for 83 yards and another touchdown. Damari Drake, they call him Day, had 13 rushes for 78 yards, 2 touchdowns, and the late pick 6 that ends up kind of icing things for the Eagles. And so those guys have now won 5 straight, I think it is. I should have pulled up the regular season record, but they're kind of catching their stride late. It's going to be a tough one having to head down to Senla and face Ash this week, but they've certainly found some momentum late in the season.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a homer, obviously, for North Louisiana. I grew up at Evangel, graduated from Calvary. Breaking passing records at Evangel is more impressive than breaking passing records anywhere else in the state. Yeah. They've had, Josh Booty, LSU quarterback, Philip Dees, North Carolina quarterback, Brock Berlin, University of Miami quarterback, Brent Rawls, University of Oklahoma quarterback. And those are just before you hit the year like 2002, because then you get into John David Booty, who won 2 Rose Bowls at USC. And then you get into all all 4 Duron boys that all started at quarterback for Evangel and put up crazy numbers, from D-Rod to Dez to David D to Dakota. And then you get into the more recent years. Obviously, Josh Booty's son had a tremendous couple of years at Evangel playing quarterback, and his other son playing receiver. The quarterback lineage at not only Evangel, but just in North Louisiana in general, because then you get into the really good gunslingers that Calvary has had. You obviously can go all the way back to like Joe Ferguson and Terry Bradshaw, and it's a long lineage in that part of the state. And so Pop's going to reset a lot of record books. I think if he ran a little bit more, some of those LCA records might be getting breathed down their neck, but those might hold for a while because those are obviously ridiculous. Pop's gonna do incredible things. I selfishly wish he was still playing for my alma mater, but I'm still happy for him and proud of him. He's doing a great job, and I think that's gonna be a fun game, man. Ash hasn't given up a ton of points this year, but it's hard to not at least give up 30 when you play Evangel. So it's going to be interesting. Their running game at Ash is obviously incredible with JT Lindsay being an LSU commit, but they're really talented at the quarterback position too. The quarterback gets a little overlooked because of how good the run game is. But I watched that Neville game, and he can make every throw on the field. So that's going to be a really fun matchup. There's fun matchups across the board, man. I'm excited about it, and I'm looking forward to coming back with you next week and talking about all of it.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time on a Saturday for sure. And just to wrap up the shout out to the Alexandria quarterback, another 2027 kid, Carson Sellers, who has the arm talent that you mentioned. And I've been so impressed seeing him twice late this season in this first season as starter, just the way he's navigating some of the pocket against teams like a Ruston and a Neville, and buying himself a little bit of time and making some interesting, off schedule and off platform throws. He had one against Neville where he had a run away from pressure, buy himself just enough space to stop, and then sidearm around another defender, heading straight in his face on a rush off the edge. And so watching his poise and development this year, if you want to look at a matchup of some of the great young quarterback talent in Louisiana next week, go on up to Alexandria and check out Ash versus Evangel. And it's not only them. There's some other great ones around the state for sure, but that's a fun one. Again, he's Chance Hester from Louisiana Football Report. I'm Jerit Roser from Louisiana versus all y'all. Appreciate his time. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. And we're looking forward to doing this each week, just kind of recapping as we head our way to the Dome. Y'all have a good Saturday.